The disaster alarm sounded at 2:20 p.m. By 2:23 p.m., Maria Santos had removed her apron and was running toward the town hall. The decision she made in those 3 minutes would save thousands of lives. But let's go back to the beginning. In Maria Santos' desk drawer lay an old photograph. One of the first female strategists to graduate from the Pentagon's Emergency Management Program. 12 years ago, after a mission went wrong, she had left everything behind and become a quiet market cashier in the small town of Cedar Falls, Iowa. At 52 years old, Maria had weathered skin and sharp brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. Her graying black hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the same green QuickMart apron every day. She moved with quiet efficiency, scanning items with mechanical precision, while her mind often wandered to logistics and contingency plans. Every morning at 6 a.m., Maria would unlock the front door of QuickMart, turn on the fluorescent lights, and begin her routine. She knew every product's location, every supplier's delivery schedule, and every customer's shopping patterns. What her coworkers didn't know was that this wasn't just retail awareness. It was military-grade situational awareness that had been drilled into her for 15 years. The store manager, Bob Mitchell, a heavy-set man in his 60s, often dismissed Maria's suggestions about inventory management or emergency procedures. "Just scan the groceries, Maria," he'd say with a patronizing smile. "Leave the thinking to management." QuickMart was the kind of small-town store where everyone knew everyone. Maria worked alongside 3 other cashiers: Jenny, a college student saving for tuition; Rick, a retired factory worker picking up extra income; and Susan, a single mother working 2 jobs. They all saw Maria as the reliable, quiet one who never complained and never missed a shift. During slow periods, Jenny would chat about her classes, Rick would share stories from his factory days, and Susan would worry about her kids. Maria listened politely, occasionally offering practical advice that was always surprisingly insightful. "You sure know a lot about organizing stuff," Susan once observed after Maria helped her create a household budget. "Ever think about going into management?" Maria had smiled quietly. "I prefer working with my hands." The customers knew her as the cashier who could ring up their groceries faster than anyone else, who never made mistakes with coupons, and who somehow always knew when they were running low on their usual items. Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer for 8 years, often joked, "Maria, you should run this whole town. You notice everything." Subtle signs of Maria's background emerged for those who knew what to look for. She organized the stockroom with military precision, grouping supplies by usage frequency and accessibility. When deliveries arrived, she could calculate optimal loading patterns in her head, maximizing space while ensuring easy access to high-turnover items. During the annual inventory count, Maria consistently finished her sections faster than anyone else while maintaining perfect accuracy. She had an uncanny ability to estimate quantities just by visual assessment, often coming within 2 to 3 items of the actual count. When the store's security system malfunctioned last spring, Maria quickly identified the problem and suggested a temporary solution that impressed even the technician. "Ma'am, where'd you learn about surveillance systems?" he'd asked. Maria had simply shrugged. "You pick things up over the years." Most telling was her reaction to the town's emergency preparedness meeting 6 months ago. When the fire chief presented the evacuation plan for Cedar Falls, Maria had listened intently, taking notes that looked more like a military assessment than grocery store observations. She'd quietly approached the chief afterward with several questions about bottleneck points and resource allocation that had surprised him with their sophistication. Tuesday, September 15th, started like any other day at QuickMart. Maria was restocking the canned goods aisle when she noticed the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, something she'd learned to recognize during her military weather training. The morning news had mentioned a storm system, but the meteorologists had predicted it would miss Cedar Falls by 50 miles. At 2:15 p.m., the first emergency weather alert crackled over the store's radio. Maria paused, listening to the details with growing concern. Hurricane Delilah, originally predicted to make landfall in Louisiana, had unexpectedly strengthened and changed course. The storm was now a Category 4 hurricane heading directly toward their region of Iowa, something that hadn't happened in over a century. At 2:17 p.m., the National Weather Service issued an unprecedented warning. Immediate evacuation recommended for all residents within 100 miles of the storm's projected path. This includes Cedar Falls, Iowa. All residents should seek higher ground immediately. The store erupted in confusion. Customers started talking over each other, some grabbing supplies, others calling family members. Bob Mitchell looked completely overwhelmed, stuttering about store policy and whether they should close early. At 2:20 p.m., the disaster alarm began blaring throughout the town, a sound Cedar Falls hadn't heard since the Cold War drills of the 1960s. Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Time seemed to slow down as her military training automatically engaged. She began rapidly assessing the situation. Population of Cedar Falls, approximately 15,000 residents. Current storm trajectory, direct hit in approximately 6 to 8 hours. Available evacuation routes, Highway 58 North, 2 lanes, County Road 15 West, 1 lane, both likely to create massive bottlenecks. Estimated evacuation time using current infrastructure, 12 to 15 hours. Time available, 6 to 8 hours. Conclusion, current evacuation plans were insufficient. Without coordinated action, thousands of people could be trapped. At 2:23 p.m., Maria Santos untied her QuickMart apron, folded it neatly on the counter, and looked directly at Bob Mitchell. "I need to go help with the evacuation," she said calmly. "Maria, we can't just leave the store," Bob started. "Bob," Maria interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the store turn to look at her. "In 6 hours, this entire area will be underwater. The store won't matter if we're all dead." Without waiting for a response, Maria walked past the shocked faces of her coworkers and customers, through the automatic doors, and began running toward the town hall with a speed and purpose that surprised everyone who had known her as the quiet cashier. As Maria ran the 6 blocks to town hall, memories flooded back. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, United States Army Corps of Engineers, Emergency Management Division. 15 years of developing evacuation strategies for major metropolitan areas. Lead planner for Hurricane Andrew response operations. Designer of emergency protocols still used by FEMA today. She had been one of the youngest strategists ever promoted to the Pentagon's Emergency Planning Division, specializing in large-scale population evacuations under extreme time constraints. Her models had saved tens of thousands of lives during natural disasters across the Gulf Coast. But that had been before Operation Silver Shield, a classified humanitarian mission in Central America where her evacuation plan had been overruled by political considerations. When the operation failed, resulting in unnecessary civilian casualties, Maria had requested immediate discharge from active duty. She couldn't bear to be part of a system that would sacrifice lives for political expediency. She had chosen Cedar Falls specifically because it was small, quiet, and theoretically safe from the kind of large-scale disasters that had defined her military career. For 12 years, she had convinced herself that she could live a simple life, helping people in small ways without the weight of life and death decisions. But Hurricane Delilah had just proven that you can't escape who you are. Maria burst through the doors of Cedar Falls Town Hall at 2:27 p.m. to find complete chaos. Mayor Patricia Williams was on the phone with state emergency services, shouting to be heard over the noise. Fire Chief Daniel Rodriguez was trying to coordinate with the Sheriff's Department, while simultaneously fielding calls from panicked residents. "We need more time," the mayor was saying into her phone. 6 hours isn't enough to evacuate 15,000 people." Maria walked directly to the large map of Cedar Falls mounted on the conference room wall. Without asking permission, she began marking the map with colored pens from the mayor's desk, drawing evacuation zones and traffic flow patterns. "Excuse me," Fire Chief Rodriguez said, noticing the woman he recognized as the QuickMart cashier. "Ma'am, this is an emergency planning session. Citizens should—" "Chief Rodriguez," Maria said without turning from the map. "Your current plan calls for everyone to evacuate via Highway 58 and County Road 15. Given the population density of residential areas 3 through 7, that will create a bottleneck at the interstate junction that will take 14 hours to clear. The storm will hit in 6 hours." The room fell silent. Mayor Williams hung up her phone. "How do you know our evacuation plan?" the mayor asked slowly. Maria turned around, and for the first time in 12 years, she stood with military bearing. shoulders back, chin up, eyes focused. "Because I wrote the evacuation protocols you're using. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, retired United States Army Corps of Engineers, Emergency Management Division. And if you want to save this town, you need to listen to me." What happened next would be talked about in Cedar Falls for generations. Maria Santos transformed from quiet cashier to commanding officer in a matter of minutes, taking control of the emergency response with a competence that left the local officials speechless. She restructured the evacuation into a three-phase operation. Priority evacuations for residents in flood-prone areas and those without transportation, coordinated through local churches and community centers. Systematic zone-by-zone evacuations using a contraflow traffic pattern that utilized both sides of Highway 58 for outbound traffic. Emergency supply distribution at 3 strategic checkpoints to ensure evacuating families had necessities for the 48-hour displacement period. "Chief Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate with the State Patrol to implement contraflow traffic on Highway 58. Mayor Williams, contact every church, school, and community organization to serve as coordination points for residents without vehicles. And I need someone to call the National Guard. We'll need their assistance with the contraflow barriers." Maria's plan was executed with military precision. She positioned herself at the Emergency Command Center, coordinating between 12 different agencies while continuously updating the evacuation timeline based on real-time traffic data and weather updates. By 8 p.m., as Hurricane Delilah made landfall, 14,847 of Cedar Falls' 15,000 residents had been successfully evacuated to higher ground. The 153 residents who remained were emergency personnel and National Guard troops implementing the final phase of Maria's plan. The floodwaters rose exactly as Maria had predicted, covering 85% of the town in 4 to 8 feet of water. The QuickMart, where she had worked for 12 years, was completely submerged. But every single resident of Cedar Falls survived. 6 months later, Maria Santos sits in her new office at the Iowa Emergency Management Agency, where she serves as Regional Evacuation Coordinator. The job came with a personal request from the governor after the Cedar Falls evacuation became a case study in emergency management programs across the country. On her desk, next to the old photograph of her Pentagon graduation, sits a new picture. The entire population of Cedar Falls, 15,000 people, gathered in the gymnasium of the Red Cross shelter where they rode out Hurricane Delilah. In the center of the photo, wearing a borrowed Red Cross volunteer t-shirt instead of her QuickMart apron, stands Maria Santos, no longer hiding who she really was. The QuickMart has been rebuilt, and Bob Mitchell stops by her office every few weeks, still shaking his head in amazement. 12 years, he always says. 12 years you scanned groceries, and I never knew you could save the world. Maria just smiles. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought by the people no one sees coming. She has learned that you can't run from who you are, but you can choose how to use who you are to help others. And sometimes, the person ringing up your groceries might just be the person who saves your life. The end. Like this story? Hit the like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who is the most underestimated person in your life?